Okay, we are going to begin the patient session. If you are a caregiver, there is a specific session for you down the escalator in 151, right? 151. So as I think that the patients will be coming in. So I want to introduce you to Dr. Geret Giles. He is a licensed psychologist in private practice in Pleasant Grove, Utah. In 2007, Dr. Giles lost his best friend to cholangiocarcinoma. He has volunteered with the cholangiocarcinoma since its inception. So if you have ever seen on the website the Ask Dr. Giles, this is Dr. Giles. He's happy, he and his associates are happy to answer any questions that they can to help you. So I'm going to turn the time over to Geret.
Thank you. You bet. Hey, Stacy, this is your place. Okay. Great. All right. Thank you for that smattering of applause. Yes, quality, not quantity. I'm sure there'll be some more people coming in, and that'll be great. Like I said, my name is Dr. Geret Giles. I'm a psychologist. Wanted to recognize, want to thank Stacy and the chairs of the conference for allowing me back. I've been here several times, and they still keep inviting me, so that must be a good thing. I also want to recognize my mom and stepdad in the audience tonight. You know, in fifth grade, thank you for applause for the. In fifth grade, you know, when you give your country report, and your mom maybe comes and stands at the back and listens to you. That's kind of what I feel like today. I'm going to have my mom listen to my report. But it should be good. It's going to be good. Like I said, I'm a psychologist in private practice, and so I want to talk about an issue that I run into a lot in my practice. I help people with this all the time, and that's talking about anxiety and stress. Hey, all right. So a couple of things that I want to do in the time that we have here. This group has specific and numerous challenges when it comes to emotional distress. There's a lot of distress that is part of what you're going through right now, and but it's varied. It's different. I mean, I was listening to some of the presentations earlier, and the questions. People have different kinds of questions based on their circumstances. And so part of the challenge for me is to present something that will be useful to a broad audience. And what I've found in the past is the best way to do that is to talk about some general concepts or general principles, and then allow you to kind of take those principles and apply them for the specific things that you're dealing with individually. Now, hopefully, along the way, we'll be able to pull off some interaction. I would like that. I would very much like that. This is a big room, and sometimes people are a little bit shy about asking a question or making a comment or observation in a room this big. But I hope you will. I think that will help us tailor what we're talking about to you and to yours. Plus, if you have a question, it's a good chance that other people have that same question. And so when you ask a question, you're probably doing your neighbor a favor because they probably had a similar question. And so hopefully there'll be some learning from each other. And that's part of what I want to do is we want to provide sort of a basic overview of anxiety so you have some concepts to draw from. But we want to also talk about areas where we can intervene and effectively interrupt anxiety because anxiety is really common. Most people have some experience with anxiety at some point in their lives, maybe not to a clinical level, but we have nervousness, we have restlessness, we have worry. That's all anxiety. So we all have some experience with that, and there's some areas and some opportunities to intervene. And so whether or not this is an issue for you now, the information can be useful later, or it can be something that you share with somebody else. In fact, I hope that's what happens. I hope what we talk about today will be something that you take with you and and share with other people. Then we kind of get this exponential effect because I tell you, you tell people, and lots of people hopefully are positively affected by that. Now, part of this also is the key word in this conference so far seems to be collaboration. We want there to be some cross work with each other, that you're talking and listening to each other and benefiting from your participation all together. So hopefully there'll be some time to reflect a little bit, integrate this information, and collaborate about what we present. Also, I want to turn you all into psychotherapists. Yeah. No, actually, no, I don't want to. So we'll be talking about some things, but like I said, this is not meant to sort of make you responsible for some sort of information. I just want to offer something that might be helpful. And as we talk for this hour or so, there might only be one thing that really jumps out at you, what I say. And in my experience with situations like this is a lot of times the thing that really jumps out at me is a connection I've made based on the information. So the information may not have been the thing that I think, oh, I've been wanting to know that particular fact. But what is shared or presented maybe makes me think of something or creates a new connection in my brain between what I already know and what's being shared here. I would suggest to you that little moment where you say, oh, okay, well, that kind of helps me understand this better. That little moment is what's meant for you. The universe brought that to you through inspiration. So I hope you make note of those particular aha moments that you might have. Okay, so now when I put this together, my idea of what I was going to be doing here and how big this room was different. So I'm going to try to adjust some of what I have on my slides for the venue that we find ourselves in. Because what I would love to do is do some small group activity stuff, which I don't know is going to work that well. But hopefully we'll do it in a way. Okay, so we can make it happen. We can make it happen. So it may be that I'll be asking you some questions. Now, the reason I would ask you some questions and elicit some comments is because I really want you to ask questions and make comments. So don't be shy, and particularly because there's no right answers. I'm going to ask probably some questions about what you're thinking about what we've said so far and what it's making you reflect on. And so it's going to be very individualized, and there's no right answer. But I'm curious about this because I'm going to put some information out there as sort of a stimulus, and your response is really the most valuable part. What I say is just kind of a process, a means to an end. The end is what crystallizes in your mind. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. So, like I said, the small group activities designed to facilitate assimilation of information, or in other words, to yeah, that's right. Thank you. And to get this stuff in your head, because this is what I want. I want a little bit of information to get to you. Cross-learning, and if I ask some questions and have roving mics, and it sounds like she's a very self-assured mic rover, you're going to get an opportunity to participate. So stay alert. Okay, and I'll skip that question. All right, so let's talk about anxiety for a little bit. So, like I said, I want to talk about some broad concepts here. I want to share some information that is applicable in a number of different ways, and then we'll talk about maybe tailoring it a little bit more to your circumstances. Anxiety is one of the most common reasons people go to therapy. It's right up there with depression. It's very treatable. There's a high level of success when treating anxiety, so it's nothing to really be afraid of or shy away from. In fact, I feel bad for people who have struggled with anxiety for a long time, because that's totally, in my estimation, my opinion, it's totally unnecessary. You don't have to suffer with anxiety for a long time. There's many very successful ways to treat anxiety. Okay, so this is really Anxiety 101. We're going to be talking about the basics of anxiety. And if you don't remember anything else about what I say today, if you will remember that anxiety is all about the unknown, that will be very successful, because that is the key to understanding anxiety. This is about the unknown. The other thing I want to say is that when we're in this anxious moment or moments, then we're probably suffering from a combination of anxious thoughts and what we'll call legitimate thoughts. And it's really, really important to be able to distinguish between the two, because we're going to treat anxious thoughts differently than legitimate thoughts. And so those are the three most important ideas that I want to stress today, is that anxiety is all about the unknown, that there's a difference between anxious and legitimate thoughts. It's important to be able to tell the difference between them, because you're going to treat them very differently. Okay, so let's talk about anxiety being about the unknown. There are lots of unknowns around us all the time. And sometimes we hear about really extreme cases of anxiety where people won't leave their home, or people have a deathly fear of something. That's anxiety. You hear about people who are compelled to wash and rewash their hands. That's anxiety. And so in those cases, when someone's anxiety is high, it's because they're thinking about the unknowns. They're dwelling on the unknowns of any kind of situation. So the compulsive hand washer, they're washing their hands to make sure they're free of contaminants. But before they even step away from the sink, they're wondering, did I get them all? Or have I been infected since I washed my hands? And so they can barely step away from the sink before they're thinking about all the unknowns. How can I be sure that my hands are still contamination free? And so what they do to be safe and to try to get rid of the distress they're having about the unknown is they turn around and wash their hands again. And so compulsive hand washers, they may wash their hands hundreds of times a day until their skin is coming off their hands and they have big sores, but they can't shake the feeling that they need to wash their hands one more time. And they figure that if they do that one more hand washing, it'll resolve their fear. It does not, because they're focused on the unknown of the situation. They're focused on what they don't know. They can't see if their hands are contaminated, but they wonder if they are, so they try to do something more. For years and years, the number one fear in America was what? Do you know? Moms. That was number two. Number one for years and years and years was public speaking. The public speaking was the number one fear. As they surveyed Americans for year after year, public speaking was the number one fear. Now, in some ways, that seems absurd, but in other ways, it makes sense to me, because if you can focus most of your concern or thoughts about the unknowns of the situation when you're going to get up and speak publicly, you can really freak yourself out. I almost did that today, actually. But so think about all the unknowns there are about speaking. What if I get up there and I can't remember what I'm supposed to say? What if I get up there and I accidentally say something really inappropriate? What if I get up there and I tell my best joke and nobody laughs? There's lots of things you can think about in terms of the unknowns of the situation, and you can absolutely wipe yourself out emotionally in the process. So those unknowns can be very, very influential. Now, what would cause a person to spend so much time thinking about the unknowns of a situation? What do you think? Depends on the personality. But a lot of times those unknowns are important. We don't want to get up and embarrass ourselves in front of everybody when we speak publicly. So we think about them, we dwell on them, we wonder about those unknowns, Because instinctively, we think that by thinking about it a lot, we might be able to turn that unknown into a known. And with legitimate thoughts, that's exactly what does happen. We can think about things, and it can turn something we're unsure about into something we're sure about. Just by strict mental effort, we think about it, we turn it over our mind, we analyze it, we figure it out. But when some unknowns don't respond to that, because we need more time, we need more information before those unknowns can become known. And so thinking about them and worrying about them and spending a lot of emotional energy on them doesn't help. It just depletes us of all of that energy and mental resiliency. I like this quote by Michel de Montaigne, who is a French philosopher. He says, "He who fears he shall suffer already suffers what he fears." I like that because to me what that means is that when we're thinking about something and having mental distress about something, particularly if it's something that hasn't happened yet, it might as well be happening to us now because we're having the distress about it. So we have to be very careful not to compound the circumstances we're in with fear and dwelling on the unknowns, because the situation we might be in, it might be difficult as it is, but we can make it more difficult on ourselves by introducing anxiety to it and dwelling about it. So sometimes we are lured out into what we might call the unknown zone. You know, we're where we are, we know things, we have a grasp on what we know, but the unknowns lure us. We want to think about them, and sometimes we can, in the process of chasing down unknowns, we can kind of get lost. We can lose our way and lose our focus and become overwhelmed by the unknowns. That's easily done. I see that every day in my practice with my clients who do that. So we have to be careful about dwelling on the unknowns. Tell you a story. So the house where we used to live before where we live now, we had a raspberry patch in the backyard. And I guess there's two kinds of raspberries. There's the kind that you cut down at the end of the season and they regenerate, and the other one, you leave the canes and the leaves and the berries regenerate on the canes. Just leave them up all winter. Well, we had the ones that you cut down to the ground every fall. So it was springtime, a little bit later in the season than it is now, and I was back in the backyard kind of looking around, just checking on the raspberry patch, because sure enough, there were green sprouts coming up out of the ground. These plants that were poking out of the ground, and they were new. So the leaves were small, and as I was looking at these raspberry plants, I saw that growing up in and among these established plants were some other plants that looked a lot like raspberry plants, but if you look closely, they were different, a little bit different shade of green. The shape of the leaves were a little bit different. I realized that those were weeds. Those were weeds that looked a lot like the raspberry plants. But they were there. They were scattered around, in and among the raspberry plants, taking the moisture from the plants, taking the nutrients out of the soil that could be used for my legitimate plants. And they were going to grow, and they were going to compete with the legitimate plants. But in the end, they were not going to produce anything useful for me. And they were not welcome. They were not part of the plan. And it reminded me of anxious thoughts. That anxious thoughts can kind of try to pass themselves off as legitimate thoughts. And they can take our time, they can take our resources, they can take our emotional energy. But just like these weeds, it'll never bear any fruit. You're never going to get any useful fruit from those anxious thoughts. It's just going to take and not give back. And so here you have a raspberry plant, and here's what the weed looks like in there. They're pretty similar, at least they were for me. And so we have to be very careful that we're not cultivating the anxious thoughts. We're not spending the same kind of care and attention and thought and effort with the anxious thoughts as we are with the legitimate thoughts, because they don't bear any fruit. And these weeds are stinging nettle, so that's especially bad. I can tell you by experience. Okay. So we want to be able to distinguish between anxious thoughts and legitimate thoughts. And here's a couple ways that you can know how to tell the difference between an anxious thought and a legitimate thought. First of all, an anxious thought has a distinct feeling associated with it. When we are thinking anxious thoughts, there is a state that we experience. Some of my clients refer to that as despair or doom or ruination. It feels really bad. It feels like something bad is happening or is going to happen, particularly if we don't think more about this anxious thought. So anxious thoughts have a particular signature, and it's pretty distinct. Also, anxious thoughts tend to be rhetorical questions sort of broad questions, hard to answer questions. A lot of times they start it with what if. So what if I get up there and I can't remember what I'm supposed to say? It's an anxious thought, particularly if it's accompanied with that doom and despair. So for me, a little while ago, I was standing at the back thinking about my presentation, and I was thinking, I wonder if I've prepared enough. I have enough material for an hour. I wasn't sure. I've done this presentation lots and lots of times, but I just kind of had that thought. And I thought, what if I can't remember what comes next in my presentation? What if I get up there and I can't put two words together, can't put two thoughts together? So I was thinking back there, and if you would have had a heart monitor on me, my heart was like jumping, and I thought, okay, hold on. Those are the things I don't know, right? But it started with what if. Also, anxious thoughts are persistent in nature. They're not easy to dismiss because they're usually about something pretty important. Like my presentation, I don't want to come up here and, embarrass myself. So that's important to think about, right? Not if it's the unknown pieces, not if it's the anxious part. Doesn't help. So anxious thoughts, there's a distinct feeling that goes along with them. Usually there's the thought comes in a what if question, or it's a rhetorical thought that's it's a hard question to answer. And then they're persistent. They don't go away right away. They don't leave us alone. And we feel like we should think about them, so they make them go away. But that's part of the allure. That's part of the trap, is to think about them. So legitimate thoughts are different because the feeling of doom isn't there. If we have a legitimate concern about something, usually that's as far as it goes. We don't think of things in terms of the ruination or the despair involved. We just think, did I lock my car when I walked away? I can't remember. Now, if that's a legitimate thought, we can check on that. We can go back and say, okay, no, it is locked. Or I can hit my clicker, and the car locks. Done. Over with. We don't think about it again. We walk to where we were going, and we continue on from there. Now, if it's an anxious thought, we're not going to be able to be satisfied, and we're going to have to check again. Am I sure? Did it lock? Did all the doors lock? I should go check. And so we go check, and we check all the doors. No, that's locked, that's locked, that's locked. And then we walk away, and if it's an anxious thought, it comes back. It says, are you sure you checked the left passenger door? And so we can end up kind of walking back and checking several times when we're anxious. So those anxious thoughts are kind of like those trick birthday candles. You try to blow them out, and it looks like they're blown out. Poof, they come right back. That's what anxious thinking is like. Legitimate thinking, you can answer the question, you can resolve the issue, you can settle it for yourself, and you can move on. And you don't have to think about it again. So that's how you know the difference. That's how you know the difference. So we have to treat the two thoughts differently. Because if we treat anxious thoughts like legitimate thoughts, they're just going to get stronger and more persistent. It's kind of like that stray dog, that shows up at your back door. If you feed it, it hangs around. If you don't feed it, it still hangs around, but eventually it wanders off. And so that's what anxious thoughts are like. We have to be very, very careful not to feed anxious thoughts. We have to be able to say, okay, that's an anxious thought. I can think about that more. I'm free to think about it more, but if I do, it's going to be more persistent. It's going to get bigger and more dominant. So the task is to not feed the anxious thought. And sometimes, you know, it's a thought that's attractive. You know, sometimes it's like a cute puppy, and we think, well, we should feed this puppy. Well, if you feed that puppy, then it's going to hang around more, and there's going to be more of a difficulty for you. Some of those anxious thoughts, we think, I need to think about this. I need to think about my presentation. I need to think about how I not fail. But if it's an anxious thought, thinking more about it will not help you. Okay, so here's where the small group activity comes in for a second. Let me ask you this. Dwelling on anxious thoughts that make us turn around and go back and check the car, see if it's locked several times, why would anybody do that to themselves? Why would anyone want to put themselves through that hassle with an anxious thought? Yes. Yes, you can answer, and maybe just, you know, maybe you don't have to wait for the mic. But what do you think? Why would somebody engage in anxious thinking in the first place, given all the problems it creates for a person? Okay, can't help it sometimes. Somebody said, say that one more time. To rehearse managing the problem if it were to happen. To be prepared. Yes. Okay, so being prepared, that seems like a good thing. It's not a choice. Yes, okay, so tell me more about that.
I don't choose to go down that rabbit hole, but you just automatically do it without realizing it.
Yes.
And you're so far down you can't get yourself out of it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yes, two parts of that. One is the engagement with the thought, and the other is the attempt to disengage. Now the problem again is when we assess the thought as something we should spend more time with. This is an important thing to talk about more, to think about more in my mind. It captures us, and it can dominate our thinking. And it's really, really hard to extricate ourselves from anxious thinking when we've been sort of entertaining it and involved in it for a while. To walk away seems reckless. In fact, that's what our anxiety will say to us. You can't stop thinking about this now. That would be irresponsible. Aren't you concerned that such and such might happen? You need to spend more time thinking about this. And so we do, oh, yeah, you're right. I got to think about this more. But that's where knowing the difference between an anxious thought and a legitimate thought is so important. Because what I train my clients to do is to be able to see that anxious thought and even to be acknowledge that I really want to think about that. That seems like an important thing to think about. But then they say, but my experience has been when I involve myself with that thought, it takes me down the rabbit hole. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't resolve. So it could be a concern about a family member. It could be a concern about your job. It could be, but if it doesn't resolve when you think about it, and it just seems to stir up more despair and feelings of doom, it's a good chance you're working with anxiety here. And the more you talk about it, the more you think about it, the worse and more dominant it's going to become. And so understanding how that happens early is important. But it's hard because, like I said, we do that to ourselves because we think it's something we should think about. But it's something that, now the topic may be something we need to continue to talk about and think about. But the way we're approaching it and what we're thinking about is not helping. So we may feel like we're preparing ourselves for something that might happen. And that's a legitimate pursuit with your thinking. But if thinking about it doesn't help you feel more settled, doesn't help you feel more sure of what you're going to do, then you're probably dealing with an anxious thought. Because thinking and preparing should have a conclusion. We prepare so that we can feel prepared. But with anxious thinking, we could do all that preparation thinking and we just continue to feel like everything is ruined and it's not going to go very well. Okay, so let's talk specifically about your circumstances for a minute. Let's talk about some of the anxious thinking that sometimes we engage in. And by anxious thinking, I mean spending a lot of time with things that don't seem to resolve, and they freak us out, they frighten us, and we don't feel any better after we've thought about them. We actually feel worse. What do you think?
Getting the news that you have cancer is quite anxious to you, and you sit back and you think, what's going to happen? How am I going to deal with this, and so forth, and so on. But you want an answer right now. You want it resolved.
Yes, exactly. I'm trying to think of a circumstance that would be more fraught with unknowns than receiving a serious cancer diagnosis, like a diagnosis of cholangiocarcinoma. There's all sorts of unknowns. In fact, as soon as that diagnosis is delivered, it's almost all unknown, including what the heck is cholangiocarcinoma? There's lots of unknowns, all of which we would like them known immediately. How's this going to go for me? What's this going to be like? What am I going to do? There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of unknowns. And so it would be very understandable to have a surge of anxiety as soon as it kind of sinks in that, oh my gosh, there are a lot of unknowns associated with this. Yes?
How do you explain you've got a test scheduled? It's scheduled 3 weeks out.
Yes.
You don't even think about it. You go have that test,
Mm-hmm.
and until you get the results, you're crazy. But
Yeah.
for the 3 weeks before, you're like, I got a test coming.
Right. Okay. So once again, I think it's instructive to follow the knowns. See, and I think you're speaking from personal experience? Okay. So it sounds like that you had this test coming up. You knew it was a test. You knew there was going to be some important results from the test. But you also knew it was 3 weeks away. And so you were able to tell yourself, okay, rather than get drawn into the unknowns, what's this test, what's the result going to be like? How am I going to feel about what I hear? What is that going to mean for my future? All of those are big questions that you'd like to know the answer to. But what you did instinctively is you said, you know what? Until I have that test, there's no way for me to answer any of those questions. Those are all unanswerable unknowns. So you brilliantly said, I'm going to wait till I have my test. I may freak out after the test, but I'm going to wait till I have my test because there's no sense thinking about it before. Now, once you take the test and you get the results back, well, then that's almost like, diagnosis again. It opens up all sorts of unknowns. Which path of, should I take now, and where should I go, and when should I do that? And so that's probably the difference, is you were able to contain the unknowns by saying, I can't know anything about that till after the test. But when the test came, then you're hit with all the unknowns, which is normal, and that's not a problem. But it's what you do with the unknowns that really makes a difference. We can sort of spin our wheels about them and just say, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. Or we can start to try to turn some of those unknowns into knowns. Okay, what do I do next? Okay, where do I get that? And when can I schedule this? And so we start to try to get those unknowns known. And if it's a legitimate problem that is amenable to solutions, we'll be able to make some progress. Maybe not as much progress as we want. We may not have all the answers we want at the exact time we want them, but we can move forward. We can make some things that are unknown known. And when we do, our anxiety goes down. Good question. Right there, Jordan, way back in the back. By the way, I want a smattering of applause for Jordan. He is the organizer of this conference. He's been working on this for a long, long time. Please.
Just related to the anxious thinking, I'm in a group back home, a support group, and a lot of us each week talk about how all of us are pretty far out in terms of ending treatment. We'll all be in treatment for a while still, but a lot of us have anxious thinking pertaining to what happens when we're done with treatment and we're no longer on treatment. And it's weird because we hate being on treatment, but we like being on treatment at the same time.
Yes.
It's
So
like-
why do you like being on treatment?
Because you having something in your system is better than not having anything in your system.
Yes, and while treatment is good for your body, being in treatment is good for your physical effort to beat the cancer, it's also good for your mental effort because that's a known. You're in, you know kind of what's going on right now. You know what the next step is. You know how this goes. You've gone to the same place to get your treatment over and over again. You're familiar with that whole routine. And so notice she's saying, when we contemplate the end of treatment, we get anxious about that. Well, some people might say, well, that's a good thing. We're ending treatment. That's a good thing. But it introduces new unknowns. And so again, for ourselves and for those close to us, when people are having anxiety, it's because they're being drawn into the contemplation of unknowns, which are of a persistent nature that don't respond right away to information. And so we can get impatient and say, why are you worrying about that? That's so far away. Or that's a good thing. Why would that be a bad thing? Well, because we don't like unknowns. As humans, we don't like the unknown. And so we take big steps to try to turn unknowns to known. We put people on the top of, bombs and send them into space, to find out what's out there because we don't like the unknowns. We want the unknowns to become known, Way back in our history, we're tossing virgins into volcanoes because we didn't exactly know what to do otherwise for the weather, and the weather was important to us, and so we thought we got to make sure our weather's good because we don't like not being in control of the things that affect us. And so we're going to make up things, and we're going to throw virgins in volcanoes, or we're going to carry around lucky rabbits' feet because we want to feel like we're turning some of the unknowns into knowns. We don't like random chance. We're uncomfortable with that as a species, and so we look for ways to make that more solid, even if it's making up something that, doesn't really work. Well, if we believe it works, then we're like, okay, well, I'll carry my lucky rabbit's foot. I'll wear my lucky shirt when my favorite team plays because I can't stand the unknown of whether they're going to win or not. But if I wear my lucky shirt, that helps them. Okay. Yes, please.
I figured while the mic was back here.
Perfect. Good
So
job.
I have a caregiver question.
Yes.
And this is my daughter. And I guess what I'm struggling with or have been struggling with is the helplessness of having a child
Yes.
with this disease. And you're back and, what did I do? What didn't I do? Is there anything I could have done different? Did I give her one too many lollipops when she was a kid?
Right.
And now, as a mom, you're used to being able to, you're supposed to be able to take care of your child and cure your child and put a Band-Aid on it and kiss their boo-boo,
Yep.
and it's all gone. And you can't do that with this. And to me, that's, it's like a 24-hour nightmare.
Yes.
So,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is because we care and we want to do something for them. And that is every parent's nightmare, is to have their child in distress and them not be able to do anything for it. And there's lots and lots of circumstances and scenarios where that's the case, where parents are like, I don't know what to do for my child. I have a neighbor whose son is up here somewhere in Salt Lake, living on the streets, and has been abusing drugs for years, and she worries about him all the time, and she wants to do something for him, and she doesn't know what to do for him, and it's been really difficult. There's lots of situations like that parents have to face. I think it's one of the hardest challenges of parenting, is understanding where our influence ends. And I work with parents all the time who are trying to work with their children, and they realize that their influence, their ability to affect the situation is limited, and it's sobering. it's sobering, and I encourage them to they're going to have to get in touch with their powerlessness in this situation, and they're going to have to accept some of that and say, I wish I could do something. I would trade places if I could, but that's not something I can do. There's a limit to what I can do, and so sometimes parents get distracted, and they spend most of their time thinking about what they can't do and what they don't know, and precious energy and time and resources go to that, rather than saying, well, let's get back to what we do know. Let's see if we can stay with what we do know. Let's operate on what we can do, even though it might be a small set of things compared to all the things we don't know or can't do. But there's real power in being able to come back and stay in touch with the knowns and operate from the knowns rather than get drawn into the unknowns. Yes, question?
Hi, I'm Mindy
Hi.
Cooper, and one of the things I've learned being patient and a caregiver that has helped me is, what do I have control over?
Yes.
And let go of the other stuff. Oh yeah, it's harder than hell to let go of the other stuff, but
Yeah.
it's, what do I have control over and what can I do about it? So that is the first priority, in
That-
my opinion, or in my experience.
I think that's a really good point. Now, let me tell you a secret about focusing, changing your focus from the unknowns to the knowns. It's very important. Let me say it a different way. It's a lot easier to think about something than to not think about something. If I say to you, whatever you do, do not think about a red elephant right now. Well, okay, see, you thought of something else to make sure you didn't think of a red elephant. So your point about focusing on what you can do, what you can control, that's really important. Because just to say, don't think about what you can't control, I've never seen that work. Because then we've got this void, we've got this gap, and what we're trying not to think about is just going to fall right back into that. But if we say, okay, I'm not going to think about what I can't do, I'm going to think about what I can do, I'm going to put that in my focus, that usually works a lot better. So thinking about something is much, much easier than not thinking about something. That hardly ever works.
How about, you don't want to talk about it out loud because it might come true?
Yes, yes. That to me is kind of virgin in the volcano kind of thinking. We're going to try to do something that's really beyond our ability to actually control, but we're going to feel like we're in control by not talking about it. Hopefully, over the course of this conference, you have heard on more than one occasion that it's very important to educate yourself, and it's very important to pursue information. If you're here today, you already know that because you're here educating yourself and pursuing information. But kind of hoping that if we don't talk about it, it'll go away or it'll get better, or at least it won't stress us out so much. That's an ineffective strategy. Please.
I just had a comment to make about the question, what do you worrying about what's going to happen when your treatment ends. My oncologist is Dr. Milan Javle from MD Anderson, a just fantastic person. And the words he says to me, he said probably 3 different times, that are so comforting, and I've just been able to not worry about that. He has said to me, Mrs. Barney, we have many options. And that's just like soothing waters to my soul, that I don't need to worry. He's looking out for me. I have total trust in him. And if we need to do something, he's got some options.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because sometimes, because we're the ones in distress, we feel like we have to get the answers. We have to know the answers. And I think one of the most important elements of treatment for cholangiocarcinoma is the idea that we need to assemble a team. We need to have people on our team that serve functions and help us in particular ways. And sometimes then what we can do is we can say to ourselves, I don't know the answer to that, but I have this really great doctor on my team, and he seems to think that he has the answers, I'm going to go with that. And that can help us reduce our anxiety. Somebody on my team is handling this. They know what to do. It's not me, but I'm going to hold on to their coattails, and we're going to get through this. And I think that can be a very, very effective element to approaching, you know, all of the unknowns that are associated with a diagnosis.
It's funny jumping the gun a bit, but thanks. What do you do when you're anxious, but you have to allay the anxiety of the people around you?
Yes, yes. Very good question. Again, if we can say, I'm really anxious about whatever, you can immediately follow that up with, I must be dwelling mostly on the unknowns. And so we're going to have to do two things at the same time. We're going to have to try to gingerly step away from the unknowns and also advocate that for the people we're trying to help and say, I know there's a lot of unknowns about this. Let's talk about some of the knowns. And sometimes they're very few. When I'm working with people who have, you know, difficulty with public speaking, we're talking about the knowns. And I'll say, let's talk about what you do know about public speaking. And oftentimes it's because they've been asked to speak at something, and so they're not exactly what to do. So let's talk about the knowns. And then they're like, I don't know any knowns. I say, yeah, sure you do. Do you know what you're supposed to speak on? Yes. What are you supposed to speak on? I'm supposed to speak on this. Okay, that's a known. Do you know where you're supposed to speak? Well, yeah, I'm supposed to speak at this place. Okay. Have you ever been there before? Yeah, I've been there before. So tell me what it looks like. Those are things you know. Do you know how to get there? Do you know what time you're supposed to be there? Do you know how long you're supposed to speak? So we go back to what they do know. And I say, look, there's other things you don't know about how the talk's going to go and how you're going to do. But when you start to feel that anxiety swell up, you come back to the knowns. And it may be, like I said, it may be a small group, but we keep coming back to that. We keep coming back to that, and the anxiety comes back down. We wish there's more things we knew, but sometimes we just have to be content with staying with what we do know. That will help us out a lot. Okay, so let me talk about a couple more things to do. I may have already talked about these in the interim, but just talk about this for a second. We talk a lot about this one, focus on the knowns rather than the unknowns. I don't know if I'm going to say anything more about that, but I can't emphasize that enough. That's the key. That's the thing that has to change with anxiety, is we have to kind of disentangle ourselves from the unknowns and stay with the knowns, even though there may be few and not as many as we would like. The second one is also very important. A lot of times, like I said, those anxious thoughts start with what if? What if I get up there and I can't remember what I'm supposed to say? What if I say something, accidentally inappropriate? What if I tell my best joke and nobody laughs? What if? There are ways then, part of the message of anxiety is, if this happened, whatever you're worried about, whatever you're thinking about, if that happened, it would be the worst thing that could possibly happen to you. And so when that's what our anxiety suggests to us, yeah, you better believe we're going to respond strongly to that. The truth is, most things that we get ourselves into, most things that happen to us, we have the ability to kind of figure it out. We have the ability to do the next thing. Rarely are we in a situation where there's not something that we can start to do and start to figure that out. And so I've talked with people, back to public speaking again, and says, okay, so let's talk about that. One of your what ifs is, what if I get up there and I can't think of what to say? I say, so what would you do? And they say, I don't want to think about that. that's too, I don't want to think about that. I said, well, no, let's talk about it for a minute. Let's push through that a little bit. What would you do if you got up there and you just got set to speak and your mind just went blank? What would you do? And so they had to kind of think that through and say, okay, if that happened, and they've come up with things. I would stall. I'd take a drink of water and see if it could come back to me. I would maybe clear my throat or something and see if I would also clear my head. I said, but yeah, what if it doesn't come back? What if you can't get it back? and their anxiety goes up, like, why are we talking about this? I don't want to talk about this. And ultimately they kind of think, well, I guess I would sit back down, I guess that's what I would do. I would say, yeah, that sounds right. I think that's probably what you would do. So how bad would that be? Oh, that would be awful. That would be terrible. So why would it be terrible? Oh, it'd be so embarrassing. Yeah, it would be embarrassing. But then what would happen? Well, I'd still live. I guess whoever was after me would probably get up and talk instead. Right, okay. And then what would happen? Well, then the next person would give their presentation. And then what would happen? Well, then I guess the meeting would be over. And then what would happen? Well, I'd run out of the building. Okay, well, maybe you would do that. But what would happen to the meeting? Well, probably not very much. Maybe they'd be happy to be out of the meeting earlier because you didn't speak. So pushing through that and converting the what if to an even if, and being able to say, instead of what if I get up there and can't remember what I'm supposed to say, to be able to say, even if I get up there and I can't remember what to say, I can figure that out. I'll work that through. That's not what I would rather do, but I can do that. This was brought home to me when I was working with a couple who were telling me about a trauma that they had a few years before. And quick story. So it's breakfast time, work day, family's at breakfast. Dad finishes his breakfast, goes out, gets in his car to go to work. Backs out of the garage, runs over what he thinks is one of the kids' bikes. So he gets out of his car mad because he thought he ran over a bike, and it was their toddler. The toddler, no one had noticed, but the toddler had slipped down from her chair at the table and had gone and followed her dad. And he'd gotten in the car and backed right over her. Killed her on the spot. They're telling me this story, and I had a toddler about that age at the time, and this was a horrific story to me. And they're telling me this story, and so I got out and I realized what had happened, and I called to my wife, and she came out, and we were so distraught. We called 911, the EMTs came. And so they're telling me the story, and they're telling me what happened next, and what happened next, and what happened next, and what happened next. And I was listening, enthralled by all of this, because they just told me what happened next. And I thought, as much as I would have wanted the earth just to swallow me up if that was my situation, I would want to cease to exist. I would want time to stop under those circumstances. The fact is, it didn't. And this couple had to do the next thing, and the next thing after that, and the next thing after that, and the next thing after that. And they had to go back in the house, and there was the little girl's half-eaten bowl of cereal, and they had to do the next thing. And they had kids that had to go to school or whatever there was next for them, and they had to start planning a funeral, and they had to do the next thing, and they had to do the next thing, and they had to do the next thing. And pretty soon it was nighttime, and they had to eat dinner. And so as much as we sort of think about these impactful things happening to us and it just blowing our world away, that's usually not what happens. The thing that we don't want to have happen happens, and then the thing after that happens, and the thing after that happens, and we have to figure out what to do, and we have to have lunch, and we have to do our laundry, and we have to do the next thing. And so even if the worst thing happens, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out what we have to do now. And that's an important tool in reducing anxiety. We'll figure it out. We'll do what we need to do. It may change everything, this news, this thing that's happened, but we'll figure out what the next thing to do is when this happens to a person. So we convert what ifs to even ifs. Another thing that's super important to do is to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. The first thing that goes out the window when it comes to anxiety, first thing that goes out the window is our breathing. So if we want to get really basic, we stop breathing very well when we're nervous. And that's not good, obviously. So self-care starts with the basics, including immediately making sure we're breathing. Let's make sure we're breathing sufficiently. But also the other things that go out the window is our ability to rest. Sometimes because we're so nervous or we're so worried about something that we stop resting. It's hard to rest, but it's super important to rest. Anxiety depletes us of all sorts of stuff physically, and it wears us out. And so being able to take care of that, being able to rest and be able to get proper fuel, sometimes that goes out the window too, that we just eat what we feel like eating and eat what's convenient because we're worried or concerned. We can't think about, opening a can of soup or something that would be good for us. We just go for the Doritos and the Twinkies, and that's not good for us. It doesn't help us. It actually creates more stress for us. So paying attention to rest and fuel is very important. When people come with anxiety and depression to my private practice, that's usually one of the things that I find very commonly is they're not resting very well, they're not taking care of their rest requirements, and they're not eating very well, and they're not getting good fuel in their body. And when we're under distress, we need both. And lastly, a thing I would suggest is to share your concerns. Is that when we're concerned or nervous, anxious, it's good to talk to someone and say, man, I'm really worried about this, or I am really nervous about that. When I was back there at the back, thinking about all the things that could go wrong with my presentation, I stepped out a minute and went across the hall there to the store, and I asked the person there, I said, hey, do you have a program? Because I just wanted to double check everything to make sure I was, what was going to happen was what I thought was going to happen. And she said, oh, you're going to talk about stress and anxiety, aren't you? I said, yeah, unless I'm overcome by my own stress and anxiety. And interestingly, saying that kind of helped me feel a little bit better. I shared my concern. I wasn't alone in it. And it kind of made it go away a little bit. So sharing what's going on for us with somebody is really important. You are now, by your association with this foundation, you are part of a big team. You are part of what I might even call an army of people who are researchers and care providers, and people who care, and people and our patients, all with similar things going on. Your circumstances vary, but there are some really significant and important commonalities. And so these are your people now. These are people that can relate, can understand, and so this is a great community to form connections with, and to be able to talk with them, to be able to listen to them, to be able to share concerns, and to be able to confide, because your circumstances are going to sound familiar to many, many in here as well. So here are the takeaways. Anxiety is something that's absolutely addressable. It has mostly to do with when we are caught up in the unknowns of a situation. And so being able to detect when that is the case, I am tangled in the unknowns, is very important, so that we can treat those anxious thoughts differently than legitimate thoughts. We want to slowly back away from anxious thinking and swing our attention back to what we do know, rather than being allured and distracted by what we don't know. Now, today we're talking about anxiety at the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation Annual Conference. But tomorrow, in a week, in a month, there'll be other things that you'll be anxious about. These concepts, these principles can be applied to any anxiety that you might be faced with. And I'm hopeful, like I said at the beginning, I'm hopeful that you will share this with somebody else who needs to hear this too, that you can say, you know what? I think the anxiety is coming from the fact that we're dwelling on what we don't know about the situation rather than staying anchored to what we do know. That will be a revelation to some people, and it will be really, really helpful to them. In closing, let me just tell you how much I admire the fact that you're here today. There's lots of places you could be, but you're here today, and I think that's wonderful. Stacy said, I've been involved with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation from its inception, and I've been so impressed with the growth and the progress and the strength that this foundation has developed over time. And I can tell you without a doubt that it is because of people such as yourselves. Those of you who are here today and trying to do what you can for your loved ones or for yourself. That's where the strength of this foundation comes from, is the participants such as yourself. So I thank you for your courage, for your determination, and for your willingness to figure this out and to do what is apparent that can be done for yourself and for those you love. Thank you for your attention. Have a great rest of your conference.
Oop.